Hello and welcome to Connected with Latham, where we discuss ideas, legal developments and business trends shaping the global economy. I'm Rob Moulton, a partner in Latham & Watkins' London office. In this episode, part of a 10-part series complementing Latham's 10 key focus areas for UK regulated firms in 2024 report, we discuss the Edinburgh Reforms. To discuss these reforms, I'm joined by my colleague from the London office, Knowledge Management Counsel, Charlotte Collins. Charlotte, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Rob. Pleased to join you.
Now, the Edinburgh Reforms, recently described by our Parliament's Treasury Committee as being a damp squib. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think this paper was a really interesting one. And, obviously that assessment grabbed a lot of headlines. I think it's very difficult if we just take a step back and look at what the Edinburgh Reforms are, to give them sort of one overall assessment. Really what we're looking at is a collection of a very broad range of reform measures covering a lot of different areas. We've got some which were reforms which are already in train. We've got some new things. We've got sort of work on repeal and restatement of retained EU legislation. So we've got such a mixed bag that it's very difficult even to refer to the reforms as one coherent reform package at all. I think let alone sort of give one sweeping judgment as to how well they've done so far. I think what I would say though is that they were obviously announced as a very ambitious package of reforms, and I think a lot of them don't feel like they have been quite as ambitious as they could have been in various respects. Maybe haven't sort of pushed things as far as they could have gone. So I think perhaps in that respect, it's fair to say they haven't delivered quite as promised yet. But then equally, there have been lots of areas of the reforms where really good progress has been made, and really quite rapid progress as well.
Well, let's pick a few of those out. Which are the ones where you think rapid progress has been made on an ambitious reform?
I think the government really prioritised certain areas of the reform agenda, and those were largely linked into its ambitions to cement the UK as a leading global market and really improve the UK's attractiveness as a place to do business. So we're looking at things like the primary market reforms, where they've been looking in detail at the listing reforms and the prospectus regime as well. And there's been an awful lot of progress on those over the last year, and we're looking to see changes to those regimes come to fruition this year. So that's been an area where there's been a really big push for change. I think as well there's been sort of drive to change areas that we've inherited from the EU that perhaps the UK hasn't always liked so much. So quite swift work to do things like removing the share trading obligation under MiFID II, for example, and removing the banker's bonus cap under CRD4 as well. And there's a lot of work in progress at the moment to reform the PRIPS regime and hopefully address some of the issues that we've seen with that as well.
Charlotte, are there areas where there is a damp squib that's really looking back on it, an area where more ambitious reforms should have occurred, but where it's clear they're now not going to?
I think one of those really that springs to mind is the short selling regime. It sounded like there was going to be more in-depth reform there with the review of the regime, and actually what the government has come out and said is that it is keeping a lot of the regime intact. It is passing a lot of areas of the regime onto the FCA, and we're awaiting the consultation on that. So it may be that there are further tweaks that the FCA wants to make, but largely that's an area where the opportunity sort of hasn't been taken. And equally, to think of another one, we don't yet know the outcome of the SMCR review, but that was one that really captured a lot of attention when it was announced as part of the Edinburgh Reforms. But actually, when the papers came out to look at the review, the tone and the tenor of the papers didn't suggest that the government and the regulators had any sort of radical reform in mind. And as I said, we're still waiting to hear where they come out on that one. But we're not expecting there to be sort of major changes to the regime there. It looks like it'll be more tweaks around the edges. So another area where could have perhaps been a bit more change to help firms with difficult areas of the regime, but we'll see what happens there.
And are there other areas in 2024 where we're still waiting to see whether or not we'll get a big reform or not? What should people be looking out for in 2024?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Rob. So, as I mentioned, we're still waiting to hear what happens on the SMCR review. We've also got more pending on the review of the bank ring fencing regime. So there's some short-term changes which are being put through that we know about. There's a further consultation due out later this year on sort of looking at the regime's long-term future. So, that could potentially be quite a big shake-up if there are sort of more drastic changes made to the regime. We're also, as I said, waiting to see a bit more about how the changes to the PRIPS regime unfold. So there's plans to change that, but we're waiting for the FCA to consult on the detail, which will be where we really see how they're going to address some of the issues around the regime. And we've got a further consultation due on the consumer credit regime as well. So we've had an initial consultation on sort of the broad approach that the government wants to take to reforming the regime, but there's a more detailed second stage consultation due out later this year as well. So we've still got plenty to look forward to this year on a range of the reforms.
Charlotte, you mentioned the bank bonus cap, which has been a somewhat politically charged topic over the years. And we have a general election coming up, presumably at some point this year. Is that likely to have an impact on the Edinburgh Reforms if there is a change of government, or on the direction of travel more generally?
Yeah, I think that's been a common question that we've had around whether a general election and potentially a new government coming in could really change the direction of everything that's happening. I think one of the first points to make on this is that actually the present government has really prioritised certain areas and done quite a lot of work on those. So things like the primary market reforms, while they're not done and dusted yet, they are nearly there really substantially. And it's the same for a lot of the key reforms that are really making changes. So, it's very unlikely that a new government would make changes to those. Obviously, it's much harder to change policy that's already been decided than to influence the policy-making process. That said as well, the sort of feeling that we're getting from reports in the press around what the opposition is saying at the moment seems to be that the opposition is broadly supportive of the Edinburgh Reforms and actually quite aligned with what the current government is doing. Certainly it's been reported in the press that they wouldn't look to reinstate the bankers' bonus cap, to take one example, and that really they want to be championing the financial services industry and helping the city to prosper. So I think the feeling that we're getting from that is that there's not going to be some sudden change in direction. A lot of these reforms are not suddenly going to be scrapped. It sounds like really they're going to sort of, if they were to get into power, to just pick up from where the government's got to.
Charlotte, thank you for joining me to discuss these reforms. And it sounds as though there's plenty more on them to follow in 2024.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
And thank you for listening to this episode in our Connected with Latham podcast series. You can subscribe and listen to new and archived episodes of Latham's podcasts on lw.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like more information about the topics in this podcast, or to access our 10 key focus areas in 2024 report, please visit the links located in the show description. We hope you'll join us again next time.
This podcast is provided as a service of Latham & Watkins LLP. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship between you and Latham & Watkins LLP, and you should not send confidential information to Latham & Watkins LLP. While we make every effort to assure that the content of this podcast is accurate, comprehensive, and current, we do not warrant or guarantee any of those things. And you may not rely on this podcast as a substitute for legal research and/or consulting a qualified attorney. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for engaging a lawyer to advise you on your individual needs. Should you require legal advice on the issues covered in this podcast, please consult a qualified attorney. Under New York's Code of Professional Responsibility, portions of this communication contain attorney advertising. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. Results depend upon a variety of factors unique to each representation. Please direct all inquiries regarding the conduct of Latham & Watkins attorneys under the New York's disciplinary rules to Latham & Watkins, LLP, 1271 Avenue of the Americas, New York, New York, 10020. Phone number 1-212-906-1200.